At my sister's birthday dinner, Mom said, "She's the only child who made me proud," then handed me the $5,000 bill. I pushed it back and said, "Then let your favorite daughter pay for it." The bill was sitting in front of me when my mother said it. $5,000 and some change, not 500, not 500 per person. $5,000 for birthday dinner my mother had decided I should pay for. I remember staring at the receipt for several seconds because my brain was still trying to make the numbers make sense. There were 12 people at the table. My sister had turned 34. My mother had spent most of the evening talking about how successful, generous, and accomplished my sister was. I had expected some awkward family favoritism because that was normal for us. I had not expected to be handed a bill that cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. The restaurant was one of those expensive places where nobody seemed to look at the prices until the check arrived. There were steaks, seafood, expensive bottles of wine, appetizers that I had barely touched, desserts, and several rounds of drinks. My wife and I had ordered reasonably. We had each gotten one entree and shared an appetizer. We had skipped the wine because we had an early morning the next day. My sister, on the other hand, had encouraged everyone to order whatever they wanted because it was her birthday. I didn't think much of it at the time. My mother had organized the dinner. She had told everyone weeks earlier that she wanted to make my sister's birthday special. I assumed she was paying. That assumption turned out to be the first mistake I made. The second mistake was believing my mother would at least be embarrassed by what she was doing. She wasn't. She slid the folder across the table toward me like she was passing me a menu. Then she reminded everyone that I was doing well financially and could handle it. I looked at my wife. She looked back at me. Neither of us said anything. Then my mother made the comment about my sister being the only child who had made her proud. That was when something inside me finally stopped trying to excuse her. I pushed the bill back across the table. I told her that if my sister was the only child she was proud of, then my sister could pay for the dinner. The table went silent. My sister's expression changed immediately. My father looked down at his napkin. My younger brother suddenly became very interested in his phone. My mother's face went completely still. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't insult anyone. I didn't make a speech. I just refused to pay. At the time, I thought the worst part of the evening was going to be the family argument that followed. I had no idea that the dinner was going to expose something much bigger that had been happening behind my back for years. And honestly, if I had known what I was going to find out later, I would have pushed that bill back a lot sooner. I grew up as the second of 3 children. My sister was the oldest. My brother was the youngest. There had always been a noticeable difference in how my parents treated us, but I didn't understand it clearly when I was young. My sister was the achiever. She got good grades, she played sports, she went to college and eventually got a master's degree. She married a successful man, she bought a nice house, she had 2 children, she had a job that impressed relatives at family gatherings. My brother was the baby. He was impulsive, funny, and constantly getting himself into trouble. My parents bailed him out of things regularly. Then there was me. I was the dependable one. That sounds like a compliment, and sometimes it was. But being the dependable child in my family mostly meant that people assumed I didn't need anything. If my sister needed help with tuition, my parents found a way. If my brother needed money for a car repair, Dad helped. If I needed something, I was usually told I could handle it. When I was 19, my car broke down while I was working 2 jobs. I called my father because I needed help getting it to a mechanic. He told me I needed to learn how to solve my own problems. 2 months later, I found out my parents had helped my sister with a down payment on a newer car. I didn't confront them. I told myself it was different. My sister needed a reliable car for graduate school. I was working and could figure it out. That became my pattern. Every time something happened, I found a reason why my parents' treatment wasn't really unfair. When my sister graduated, my parents paid for a huge celebration. When I finished my degree, we had dinner at home. My mother said she was proud of me. Then she spent most of dinner talking about my sister's graduation. When my sister got married, my parents contributed a significant amount toward the wedding. When I got married, my wife and I paid for everything ourselves. My parents attended. They gave us a nice toaster oven. I actually liked the toaster oven. I still have it. I mention that because I don't want to pretend every interaction with my parents was horrible. It wasn't. My father could be kind. My mother could be affectionate. We had good holidays. There were birthdays where everyone laughed. There were Thanksgiving dinners where we actually got along. That was part of what made the favoritism difficult to confront. It wasn't constant cruelty. It was 1,000 small decisions that always seemed to benefit the same person. My wife noticed it before I did. She never pushed me to cut off my family. She never demanded that I choose between her and them. She just occasionally pointed out things I was ignoring. I usually defended my parents. I told her that families weren't perfectly equal. I told her my sister had different needs. I told her my brother was going through a rough period. I told her I didn't care about money. The last part was true. I didn't care about getting the same dollar amount my siblings received. What I cared about was feeling like my parents saw me as their son rather than the person who could be relied on whenever someone else needed something. By the time of my sister's 34th birthday, I had become financially stable. My wife and I had bought a modest house. We had a mortgage. We had retirement accounts. We had an emergency fund. We weren't rich. We were the kind of people who checked the grocery bill before leaving the store. We planned major purchases. We didn't carry balances on our credit cards. My mother somehow interpreted that as us having unlimited money. She started asking for small things, then bigger things. At first, it was $20 for something she had forgotten, then $50 for prescription, then money for my brother's car insurance. I helped when it made sense. I stopped when it didn't. My wife and I had one rule. We could help family with genuine emergencies, but we wouldn't become the family's permanent financial backup plan. That rule caused some tension. My mother thought it was selfish. My wife thought we were already too generous. I was stuck in the middle. Then my sister's birthday came around. My mother planned the dinner. She created a group message with the family. She said she had found a wonderful restaurant and wanted everyone there. She said it was important to celebrate my sister properly because she had worked so hard. I remember thinking that sounded like my mother. I agreed to come. My wife came with me. My brother came with his girlfriend. My parents arrived early. My sister arrived about 20 minutes late because she had been at work. Nobody complained. My mother immediately stood up and hugged her. She had brought a small wrapped gift. My sister opened it at the table. It was an expensive piece of jewelry. I remember looking at the box and thinking my mother must have spent at least $1,000. My mother told my sister she deserved it. My sister hugged her. Everyone smiled. I wasn't jealous of the necklace. That part is important. I genuinely didn't care about the necklace. What bothered me was the way my mother looked at my sister while she was opening it. There was a kind of pride in her expression that I had almost never seen directed at me. My sister gave a little speech about how much she appreciated Mom. Then my mother started talking about everything my sister had accomplished. She mentioned her education. She mentioned her career. She mentioned her children. She mentioned how responsible she was. She mentioned how she had always made the family proud. I listened. I ate my food. I tried not to let it bother me. Then my mother said the sentence that changed the evening. She said my sister was the only child who had really made her proud. She didn't say it privately. She didn't say it accidentally. She said it at a table full of people. My sister looked uncomfortable. My father cleared his throat. My brother stared at his plate. My wife put her fork down. I smiled because I didn't know what else to do. Then my mother picked up the check. She looked at me. She told me I could take care of it. I thought she was joking. I waited for her to laugh. She didn't. She said I was the financially responsible one and that this would be a nice gift to my sister. I looked at the receipt. That was when I realized the $5,000 wasn't an accident. It was intentional. She expected me to pay. I asked her whether everyone was supposed to split it. She said no. She wanted me to cover the entire bill. I looked around the table. Nobody spoke. I felt embarrassed, not because of the money, because my mother had just publicly told me I was the child who made her least proud and then immediately asked me to spend $5,000 celebrating the child she preferred. Something about the combination made me stop. I pushed the check back. I told her that if my sister was the only child who made her proud, my sister could pay for it. My mother looked shocked. Then she became angry. She accused me of ruining my sister's birthday. I told her I wasn't trying to ruin anything. I simply wasn't paying the bill. My sister started crying. That made me feel terrible. For a moment, I wondered whether I had gone too far. My sister said she didn't ask me to pay. I believed her. She looked genuinely uncomfortable. My mother kept insisting that I was being petty. She said I was making everything about money. That sentence actually helped me make my decision. I told her it wasn't about money. It was about being expected to accept disrespect and then financially reward it. The restaurant manager eventually came over because the table had been sitting there for several minutes. That was probably the most embarrassing part. My father finally put down his credit card. He said he would cover the immediate bill and everyone could settle up later. I told him I would pay for my wife and myself. My brother agreed to pay for his share. My sister offered to pay for her own portion. My mother became even more upset because the entire plan had fallen apart. My father paid the restaurant. We left separately. My wife and I drove home in silence for several minutes. She finally asked whether I was okay. I said I didn't know. I wasn't angry in the way I expected. I was tired. It felt like I had been carrying a box for years without realizing how heavy it was, and someone had finally asked me to carry one more thing. I got home and couldn't sleep. Around midnight, my father texted me. He said my mother was very upset and that I needed to apologize. I didn't respond. Then my sister texted me. She said she was sorry about what Mom had said. She also said she hadn't known Mom planned to make me pay. I told her I didn't blame her. That was true, I didn't. The next morning, I went to work. I tried to focus on normal things: emails, meetings, coffee, a spreadsheet that needed to be finished. But I kept thinking about the dinner, not just the bill, the necklace, the way my mother talked about my sister, the fact that she apparently believed I could simply absorb a $5,000 expense without question. By lunchtime, I had convinced myself that the problem was probably limited to the dinner. Then my wife sent me a message. She had found something. A few months earlier, my mother had asked me to help organize some old family paperwork because Dad had trouble keeping track of documents. My mother had given me a folder containing copies of insurance policies, property records, and some financial documents. I had scanned a few of them for safekeeping. My wife remembered that one of the files included a copy of a home equity loan. She asked me whether I had ever looked at the amount. I hadn't. That evening we pulled up the scanned documents. The loan was for $28,000. It had been taken against my parents' house about 18 months earlier. The borrower was my mother. I assumed the money had been used for home repairs. Then I noticed a line on one of the documents showing the disbursement account. It was a checking account I didn't recognize. I asked my mother about it. She didn't answer my call. She texted that she was busy. That was unusual. She normally responded quickly when money was involved. I left it alone. 2 days later, my father called me. He asked whether I had spoken with Mom about the loan. I said yes. He went quiet. Then he told me he didn't know about the loan. That was the first moment I realized the situation might be much bigger than favoritism. My father said he had signed some paperwork but believed it was related to refinancing. He said my mother handled most of their finances. He had trusted her. I asked him whether he knew where the money went. He didn't. I didn't either. I told him I didn't want to get involved unless he wanted my help. He said he did. We met at a coffee shop the next afternoon. My father brought a folder. He looked exhausted. He told me that after the birthday dinner, he had started looking through their bank statements. He had found several transfers to an account that wasn't in his name. The transfers were usually between $500 and $2,000. There were dozens of them. He had assumed they were household expenses. Now he wasn't sure. I helped him organize the statements. We didn't accuse anyone. We simply made a list. Date, amount, destination, description. Some transfers went to an account with my sister's name attached to it. I felt my stomach drop. My father noticed. He said he didn't want to believe it either. We kept going. There were payments toward my sister's credit card. There were transfers that appeared to match her mortgage payments. There were checks made out to a private school where my sister's children attended. There were payments to a contractor who had remodeled my sister's kitchen. The total wasn't $28,000. It was much more. Over several years, my parents had given my sister tens of thousands of dollars. Some of it was probably legitimate help. Some of it might have been gifts. But there were also transfers my father knew nothing about. That was when I finally understood something. My mother hadn't just favored my sister emotionally. She had built a financial system around that favoritism, and I had helped sustain it by never asking questions. My father asked me not to tell my sister yet. I agreed we needed facts, not assumptions. My father contacted the bank. The bank couldn't discuss my mother's private accounts with him without authorization. That complicated things. He was a joint owner on some accounts, but not others. We learned that some of the money had come from accounts he didn't control. My father spoke with an attorney. The attorney told him to collect documents before confronting anyone. That advice made sense. I also started reviewing my own records. I wanted to know whether my mother had ever involved me in something financially questionable. I found an old message from her asking me to co-sign a small personal loan for my brother. I had declined. She had been angry for months afterward. I had forgotten about it. Then I remembered another incident. 2 years earlier, my mother had asked me to sign a document related to their house. She said it was simply a form allowing her to handle some paperwork. I had refused because I didn't understand it. At the time, she called me paranoid. Now I was grateful. I pulled the document from my files. It was a limited power of attorney. It would have given her authority to handle certain financial matters on my behalf. I had never signed it. I started wondering how many times I had been one signature away from a problem. My wife told me I needed to stop blaming myself for not knowing. She was right. I had trusted my mother. Trust wasn't stupidity. But from that point forward, I decided I wasn't going to rely on trust where documentation was available. My father followed the attorney's advice. He requested copies of the mortgage records. He requested copies of the home equity loan. He requested bank statements for every joint account he could access. Then we found another problem. The home equity loan had been used partly to pay off a debt connected to my sister. The debt wasn't listed under my sister's name. It was tied to a credit card that had apparently been opened using an authorized user arrangement. My father didn't recognize the account. He started asking questions. My mother finally admitted she had used some of the home equity money to help my sister. She said it was necessary. She said my sister had been struggling financially. That wasn't what my sister had told me. My sister had always presented herself as doing well. She had a good job. Her husband had a good job. They had a nice house. They drove newer vehicles. They took vacations. I asked my sister whether she knew about the loan. She said she knew Mom had helped them. She didn't know the exact amount. Then she admitted something else. She had received money from Mom for years. She thought it was coming from Mom's personal savings. She said she had never asked where it came from. I couldn't really blame her for that. If someone hands you money, you don't necessarily investigate the source. But then she told me she had recently received a message from Mom asking her to keep quiet about the financial help because Dad was becoming suspicious. That changed everything. My sister wasn't completely unaware. She knew there was something she wasn't supposed to discuss. She also said she had started feeling guilty. She had been planning to tell Dad after the birthday dinner. I asked why she hadn't. She said she was afraid. She was afraid Dad would cut her off. She was afraid Mom would blame her. She was afraid the family would fall apart. I understood. I was still hurt, but I understood. My father was less forgiving. He felt betrayed by both of them. The attorney explained that gifts weren't automatically illegal. Parents could give their adult children money. The bigger concern was whether my mother had concealed debts, misrepresented financial information, or used joint assets without my father's knowledge. That distinction mattered. It meant we couldn't just call everything fraud because it felt wrong. We had to know exactly what had happened. My father started separating their finances. He opened an individual checking account for his income. He contacted the mortgage company. He reviewed retirement accounts. He froze credit where appropriate. He also obtained a credit report. That's when another problem surfaced. There was an unpaid account associated with my mother that he didn't recognize. It wasn't huge, about $3,000, but it had gone to collections. My father was stunned. He had always believed they had excellent credit. My mother eventually admitted she had used a store credit account to buy furniture for my sister. The furniture wasn't technically my sister's debt. My mother had put it in her own name. She said she intended to pay it. She hadn't. That explained why my mother had become so defensive whenever anyone questioned her finances. She wasn't simply helping my sister. She was stretching their household finances to maintain a lifestyle my sister couldn't always afford. And somehow, because I was the dependable child, I had been expected to absorb the consequences. The birthday dinner suddenly looked different. My mother hadn't randomly decided I should pay $5,000. She had likely been trying to avoid paying it herself. She knew money was getting tight. She knew my father was looking into the accounts. She knew the family was beginning to notice. And she had assumed I would quietly cover the expense because I usually did. That realization hurt more than the original insult. I had thought my mother didn't appreciate me. Now I realized she appreciated me in a very specific way. She appreciated that I was reliable. She appreciated that I usually didn't ask questions. She appreciated that I solved problems without creating new ones. That wasn't the same as love. My sister and I had a long conversation after that. She apologized. She told me she never wanted me to feel like she had stolen anything from me. I told her I didn't blame her for being the favorite. I blamed the system our parents had created. She cried. I did too. We talked about our childhood. For the first time, she admitted she had noticed the favoritism. She had just interpreted it differently. She thought my parents expected more from me because they believed I was capable of more. She said she sometimes envied the independence I had. I almost laughed. I told her independence hadn't always felt like a compliment. We both realized that our parents had assigned us roles. She was the daughter who needed support. I was the son who could handle himself. My brother was the child who needed rescuing. Nobody had asked us whether we wanted those roles. My brother eventually got involved too. He had received money from my parents as well, not nearly as much as my sister. He admitted he had been embarrassed about it. He also admitted that he had sometimes asked Mom for money because he knew she would say yes. He wasn't proud of that. Neither was my sister. For the first time in years, the three of us talked honestly about money. It wasn't a pleasant conversation. There were accusations. There was crying. There were long silences, but it was honest. My father and mother eventually decided to separate their finances. They didn't immediately separate as a couple. They went to counseling. They met with an attorney. They worked out a plan for the debts. My father discovered that some of the money my mother had given my sister could be documented as gifts. Other amounts were unclear. My sister offered to repay what she reasonably could. My parents refused some of the repayment because they considered those amounts gifts. Other amounts were turned into a formal repayment agreement. It wasn't dramatic. There was no courtroom scene. Nobody was arrested. Nobody went to jail. The attorney explained that the situation was primarily a family and financial dispute, not some obvious criminal conspiracy. That actually made the whole thing feel more real. There wasn't a magical moment where a judge declared one person the villain. There were bank statements, loan documents, tax questions, repayment plans, arguments over what had been a gift and what had been a loan. My father also had to deal with the consequences of refinancing. The home equity loan increased their monthly obligations. He had to change their budget. They canceled several subscriptions. They delayed a planned vacation. My mother sold some jewelry. My father took a closer look at retirement planning. My sister started paying her own bills without expecting help from mom. My brother got a second job for a while to stabilize his finances, and I stopped being the family emergency fund. That was probably the biggest change. At first, my mother was furious. She said I had turned my back on her. She said I was punishing her for loving my sister. I told her she was allowed to love whoever she wanted. She was not allowed to spend my money without my permission. She said that wasn't fair. I told her neither was handing me a $5,000 bill after publicly telling me I was the least successful child. She never apologized for that part. That bothered me. My father eventually apologized. My sister apologized. My brother apologized for some of the times he had accepted help and then acted like I was lucky because I didn't need it. My mother never really apologized. For a while, I thought that meant I needed to cut her out completely. I didn't. Instead, I changed the relationship. I stopped discussing my income. I stopped telling her how much we had in savings. I stopped sharing details about our mortgage. I stopped signing anything without reading it. I stopped lending money without a written agreement. If she asked for money, I either said no or asked for documentation. That sounded cold to her. It didn't feel cold to me. It felt adult. There was one more thing that happened about 6 months after the birthday dinner. My mother called me one evening. She said she had been going through old family papers. She found a handwritten note from my grandfather. My grandfather had died several years earlier. The note wasn't legally binding. It wasn't a will. It was just something he had written before he died. My mother wanted me to have it. I almost didn't take it, but I did. It said that he had always admired how I handled responsibility. He wrote that he knew I didn't ask for much. He wrote that he hoped I would remember that being dependable didn't mean I had to carry everyone else's burdens. I sat in my car after reading it. I cried, not because it solved anything. It didn't. It didn't erase my mother's favoritism. It didn't fix the money. It didn't change the birthday dinner. But it reminded me that someone had noticed. Someone had seen me. I think that was what I had wanted from my mother all along, not more money, not a bigger birthday gift, not equal treatment down to the dollar, just recognition. My mother eventually came to my house for Thanksgiving that year. It was awkward. My wife made too much food. My brother brought a pie. My sister brought a casserole. My father arrived early to help set the table. My mother sat at the kitchen island while everyone moved around her. Nobody mentioned the birthday. Nobody mentioned the loans, but everyone knew. At one point, my mother asked whether I was still angry. I told her I wasn't angry every day anymore. That was the honest answer. I was still hurt. There is a difference. She said she thought I had always been jealous of my sister. I told her maybe there were times I had been. I admitted that. I said I had spent years pretending I didn't care when I actually did. She looked surprised. I told her I didn't want her to feel guilty for loving my sister. I wanted her to understand that loving one child didn't require making another child feel disposable. She didn't respond for a long time. Then she said she hadn't realized how much I had noticed. I told her that was probably the problem. I had noticed everything. I had just spent years explaining it away. After Thanksgiving, things slowly became more normal, not the old normal, a different normal. My mother stopped asking me for money. My father started handling more of the household finances. My sister became much more independent. My brother stopped calling Dad every time he had a financial problem. The family wasn't magically healed. There were still disagreements. There were still uncomfortable holidays. There were moments when old patterns tried to return, but now we noticed them. That mattered. The following year, my sister had another birthday. My mother wanted to have dinner again. This time, she made a reservation at a normal restaurant. Nobody mentioned who was paying. When the check came, everyone paid for their own meals. My sister actually insisted on paying for my wife and me. I refused, not because I was trying to make a point. I just wanted to pay my own way. She laughed and told me I was impossible. I told her I had learned my lesson. She laughed again. It was the first time I had laughed with my sister about the whole situation. That felt good. There was still one unresolved issue with my mother. She wanted me to forget what she had said at the original birthday dinner. I couldn't. Not because I wanted to hold it over her, because some sentences change how you understand years of your life. When she said my sister was the only child who made her proud, I realized I had been trying to earn something that wasn't being offered equally. I had spent years thinking that if I worked hard enough, stayed responsible enough, helped enough, and never caused problems, eventually my mother would look at me the way she looked at my sister. That was never going to happen, and strangely, realizing that was freeing. I stopped trying. I didn't become cruel. I didn't stop loving my parents. I just stopped performing for approval. If my mother was proud of me, great. If she wasn't, I could live with that. My wife told me she noticed the change. She said I seemed lighter. I think she was right. I also became more careful with documentation. That sounds like a boring lesson, but it probably saved me from future problems. I keep copies of important documents. I read contracts before signing. I don't co-sign loans casually. I don't lend money without clear terms. I don't assume family automatically means financial trust. And I don't confuse being dependable with being obligated. My father eventually told me he was grateful I had refused to pay that restaurant bill. At first, I thought he was joking. He wasn't. He said that if I had paid it, everyone might have gone home, my mother would have felt relieved, and the financial problems might have stayed hidden for another year. He said the argument forced him to look at things he had avoided. I told him I hadn't planned any of that. I just didn't want to pay $5,000. He laughed. He said sometimes refusing one unreasonable request is enough to expose a much bigger problem. I think about that a lot, because if I had paid that bill, I probably would have spent the next day feeling ashamed that I had allowed myself to be treated that way. Instead, I spent the next few months learning things about my family that I never wanted to know. It was painful, but it also made the family more honest. My mother and father eventually worked out their financial situation. They didn't lose their house. They didn't end up in court. There wasn't some dramatic inheritance battle. There were just consequences. My mother had to accept that she couldn't keep financing my sister's lifestyle. My sister had to accept that accepting help meant avoiding responsibility. My father had to accept that trusting someone with all the finances meant giving up visibility. And I had to accept that I couldn't keep pretending everything was fine just because admitting otherwise would make family gatherings uncomfortable. My relationship with my sister is probably better now than it was before. We don't talk every day. We aren't suddenly best friends. But when something happens, we talk directly. If she needs help, she asks. If I can't help, she accepts it. If I need help, I ask. That last part took me longer to learn. I spent so many years being the responsible one that I forgot I was allowed to need people too. My relationship with my brother improved as well. He eventually told me that he had always assumed I was judging him because I didn't need financial help. I told him I wasn't. I was actually jealous that he felt comfortable asking. We both laughed at how ridiculous that sounded. He said he thought I had everything figured out. I told him nobody did. My mother still has a favorite. I don't know if she would admit that. Maybe she doesn't even see it anymore. Maybe she believes she treated all of us fairly. People have a remarkable ability to explain their own behavior in ways that let them sleep at night. I've stopped trying to change her version of the past. What matters is how I live now. I don't measure my worth by how much my parents praise me. I don't compare my life to my sister's. I don't keep score. And I definitely don't accept surprise $5,000 bills. There was another birthday dinner a few months ago. It wasn't anyone's milestone birthday. Just a normal family dinner. The check arrived. For half a second, everyone looked at me. Then my brother started laughing. My sister laughed. My father laughed. Even my mother smiled. The waiter hadn't even done anything unusual. It was just an ordinary check. But for our family, that moment carried a lot of history. My mother picked up the bill and said she would pay for herself. Everyone else paid their own share. I paid for my wife. Nobody argued. Nobody guilted anyone. Nobody gave a speech about who was proud of whom. We just ate dinner. And honestly, that was probably the happiest family meal we'd had in years. I used to think winning meant proving my mother wrong. It doesn't. I used to think I needed some huge piece of evidence that would make everyone admit I had been right. I didn't. The bank statements mattered. The loan documents mattered. The paperwork mattered. But the biggest thing I learned was that I didn't need to win an argument. I just needed to stop participating in something that wasn't fair. When my mother handed me that $5,000 bill, she probably thought I would do what I had always done. She thought I would swallow the insult. She thought I would pay. She thought I would keep the peace. Instead, I pushed the bill back. That small decision forced everyone to look at the numbers. Once the numbers were visible, the rest became much harder to ignore. I still have the receipt from that original birthday dinner. I found it in an old folder while cleaning out my desk. I almost threw it away. Then I kept it, not as a reminder to be angry, as a reminder of the exact moment I finally understood that being the reliable son didn't mean I had to be the family's safety net. The bill was $5,000. The lesson cost me a lot less than that, and for the first time in my life, I was okay with not being the child my mother was most proud of. I was finally learning to be proud of myself.